Well, it was crap, but at least it wasn't Fulham crap. As we look back on the Castor derby between Newcastle United and Aston Villa, two traditional clubs wearing their traditional strip. Did you see that Castor came out with a new line of Aston Villa training gear, and it's pretty sexy? Does Unai Emery want all new gear for his new staff? This is called the staff sweatshirt, which is pretty sweet. Then the players have this 3/4 zip training job, which is also brand new and very sweet. And I'm bringing this in because it's getting colder now here in Canada. And, when your team is playing crap, nice to do some retail therapy. I've actually put a link in the description below and a promo code to the new gear and some of the old. Seems like everything's on sale. Later, we will preview Manchester United on the weekend. But in the meantime, I guess we have to review Newcastle 4, Aston Villa 0. Here's the GIF that best describes how I felt in learning about Big Cuts losing his job. So you have Big Cuts, and then you have Big Cuts. And it's sad when anybody loses a job, quite frankly, especially when they've been around for 4 years and have been part of the success and the fabric of it all. But I'll tell you something right now. Big Cuts will have received over 100 phone calls in these last couple of days, and I bet you a couple of them would have been substantial offers to come join us over here. Maybe not in the Premier League, but he has too good a resume. He's too good a guy. Still, football is ruthless and sucks sometimes. Have you ever wondered, like me, how a side can look so different from one week to the next, and particularly look so different playing at home versus away? The field is pretty much the same size. The surfaces are all the same now. They're the top of the line hybrid pitches. The goals are the same. The corner flags are in the same places. And yet the team that played over here looks nothing like the team that plays over here. And among the long checklist for Unai Emery is, can this Aston Villa team be more consistent week to week at home to away? Because the mark of a truly special, great side is one that looks the same when it plays over here as when it does over here. Well, St. James's Park, another graveyard for Aston Villa points. No Ahmed El Mohammadi to salvage a late equalizer in this game as we present the Holy Trinity show, the 3 key issues or moments that defined Newcastle 4, Aston Villa 0, starting with the key statistics. And I don't remember 2 weeks that were so wide in the statistical category from Brentford to this game. And I chose aerial duels as the highlighted statistics because Newcastle's a big physical team factor, but expected goals, I've never seen it this wide all season. 20 shots, 7 on target, 6 big chances created. Villa, no shots, no big chances, and 62% of the aerial duels were won by the home side. A tough old day at the Geordie office. Since we last met, some juicy gossip surrounding Aston Villa that sort of paints an interesting picture behind the scenes, including Christian Purslow, when Chelsea came to Aston Villa, going into the Chelsea owner's box, the American Tad, asking, how did Pochettino interview and why didn't you hire Pochettino? So that was already circulating in the Chelsea game prior to the visit to Fulham. And then Michail Antonio comes out and says, yeah, I know some of the Aston Villa players, and they were not having Steven Gerrard. And because he's a Jamaican international, you know that one of those players who were not having Gerrard was Leon Bailey. We know it was also Ollie Watkins and probably Tyrone Mings and maybe even Emi Buendia. It shocks me still that a player of Steven Gerrard's stature could be so out of touch with players. It's not that long ago that he was in those locker rooms, and he was completely not on the same page as the squad. Clearly. Key issue number 3, Debu dazed. Now, I'm not sure if you were thinking this like I was, but as every minute ticked on by, I was wondering, is Emi Martinez trying to grind this game to a halt and keep it choppy like the rest of that first half was, which benefited Aston Villa, wind the crowd up, because he's done it before. But as the medical staff continued to work on him, and as the minutes went by, and with the World Cup looming, I was starting to get a little bit concerned. And what's annoying is that was so avoidable. Tyrone Mings' knee hitting the side of his head. It was awkward and clumsy, just like Aston Villa's performance as a whole in that first half. And it's not the first one that causes the problem, that first blow to the head. It's the second one that can leave you out for months and sometimes even years. Now, you could plainly see the way he gathered the ball. There was a whiplash type motion to how he landed on the ground at that time. And I'm willing to bet a lot of money that the World Cup thoughts were running through his mind, and there was no chance he was going to risk anything further from there. But still, you are now bringing in a goalkeeper who has not seen a minute of action this year, hasn't kicked a ball yet. And I have to say, Aston Villa did a very good job of settling things down, keeping possession, and not allowing Robin Olsen to face any action. But then when the first action is a penalty, it's always going to be hard. And thankfully, Emmy went on social media and said, "I'm okay." And that's a huge relief. By the way, that's pretty cute, don't you think? And so let's hope he is fully back to full fitness come this weekend. Big issue number 2. Well, it happened to be the 2-0 goal. And at that stage, Newcastle United's tails were fully up. And Callum Wilson might be a guy that you'd consider marking a little bit more closely from a corner, because he's allowed to step in and tee it right up. Beautifully worked corner, by the way. I'm not taking anything away from the routine. Lovely flight on the ball from Kieran Trippier, but I don't understand what Villa's trying to do here. Is it zonal marking? Is it a hybrid? And I don't understand zonal marking. I've never wrapped my head around it. You got 3 guys standing static in the 6-yard box, and basically you're allowing forwards to run at you while you're static. You've got no chance. And if you go hybrid and you go man-to-man in addition to the zone, well, technically then you are 3 men short. So this is why I don't understand zonal or hybrid marking for that matter, and why I always tell my young players, you're going man for man, that's your guy, stay goal side and don't lose that battle. Now, there was a VAR check after the Callum Wilson goal because Dan Burn looked like he might be in an offside position when the ball was played across to Wilson. There was also a check after the Joe Linton goal because he too seemed to be in an offside position when the ball was shot before he buried the rebound. When I think back to last week and Danny Ings' 2-0 goal, where it did look like he was ahead of the last defender. And then going all the way back to Jacob Ramsey's goal against Southampton, has there been a change in the interpretation of offside in season in the Premier League? Because, another thing we haven't seen is the actual VAR review where they're triangulating those laser lines, and they're drawing them and then they figure out where the line is and one turns red and one turns blue. Why haven't we seen those decisions play out in the last few weeks? Because we saw them at the beginning of the season. I mean, is it possible that there's been an in-season change? And if there has been, that would heavily undermine the competition, not to mention that not being communicated to any of us. But it just seems like in those 4 examples I gave you, there's been a change somehow from earlier this season or even last season. If you're a professional player, you don't just stop playing there and hope to see an offside flag raised. You carry on, you play the whistle, you react, and Villa didn't, and Callum Wilson is able to tee up a header, and then, it's a salvage operation from there, and Aston Villa were kind of in 2 minds. Do we keep chasing this game? We're not going to sit back and try to defend in a 2-goal deficit. And for Newcastle, the way they're playing right now, it's like, how much, how many, let's go. And in the end, probably the scoreline flattered Villa a little bit. And the number 1 key issue or moment that defined Newcastle 4, Aston Villa 0, well, it had to be the penalty, didn't it? Not just the circumstances surrounding the penalty, but the timing of the penalty, obviously expertly dispatched by a very informed Callum Wilson right now. But to concede at the end of a half that Villa had successfully chopped and disrupted and frustrated the crowd Well, the difference between going into halftime at 0-0 and 1-0 down is like night and day for the mentality of both sides. And as we both know, when Villa has to chase a game, especially on the road, 1-0 generally becomes 2-0 and 2-0 becomes 3-0, and take nothing away from this geezer who's on fire right now. And I'm going to be very curious to see whether or not this team, with all its money, attain its position in the Premier League and maybe create a new Premier League world order and a big seven. Well, that's going to be very fascinating. But Villa fans should take some comfort in where Newcastle was a year ago and the sudden change in fortunes. Some rightfully questioned whether this should even be a penalty, because if you're sliding to block a shot and your arm happens to be flailing, is that intentional, unintentional, natural, unnatural? Ask Luca Dean from the Crystal Palace game when he's going to get leverage. The ball skips off the back of his arm, not even going towards goal. It's so bloody inconsistent, and I think I have a solution. Honestly, I do. That would take all the subjectivity away from referees, assistant referees, even VAR, and it would make the games far more enjoyable for pundits and supporters, and it would take away a punishment that just has never, ever suited the crime, in my opinion. The problem is it's a radical rule change that messes with history a little bit, and we know the old farts in their suits sitting around the IFAB table are loath to tampering with history. Here it is. Make all handball infringements indirect free kicks, like offside. It hits your arm, natural, unnatural, intentional, unintentional. It's a free kick, but this time inside the penalty area, it's not a penalty, with one exception. If you deliberately prevent the ball from going in the goal, that's still the denial of an obvious goal-scoring opportunity. It's a red card and a penalty. Luis Suarez for Uruguay against Ghana in the 2010 World Cup. We know what that looks like. That is obvious. But the rest, all the subjectivity is gone now. For the referee and for the VAR, it's a free kick. It's not an automatic goal like a penalty, but it's still a pretty good chance. And think of all the set-piece routines in and around the box with the wall lined up on the goal. I mean, it could be a lot of fun. But as I said earlier, this is not a sport where radical law changes are made quickly. It does get a little depressing doing this after a heavy loss, but we will forge ahead with the updated categories we follow throughout the season, and the record away from Villa Park is utterly dire now, just 2 from a possible 21 points. Those VAR decisions to me didn't go either for or against Aston Villa. Goals weren't being overturned. Now, a lot of people have either said that Austin McPhee's got to go with everybody else, or they've defended him. We have no idea what he does behind the scenes, but from my perspective, he is still the set-piece coach, because any player that comes into the game is being given their set-piece assignments by McPhee. So we can only assume that this is still his remit, and in this game, it was a -2, so -6 on the season, and against the top 6, 1 out of a possible 12 points. And so the Unai Emery era has begun. He's the manager with the biggest and longest contract in Aston Villa history. This is a guy who's going to be tasked with not just coaching a team, but seemingly building football structure of a club, which is great. I just hope some of the people that are on social media that think this is like pressing some kind of a switch and all of a sudden Aston Villa is going to leap up to the table, dial back their expectations a little bit, because this is still going to take time, and it's going to take more investment in January. And he has to rehabilitate some of the current players, not the least of which is Phil Coutinho, who just looks a shadow of himself in the last couple of games, and Ollie Watkins as well, who has said he now wants to pledge his future to Aston Villa, which is good news, but Ollie is going to need some time, and some TLC needs to have the right role. There's also been some whispers that Emery's first course of business is to target a left-sided center back in the January window. Where have we heard that before, and who is affected if that occurs? And if you believe what you're hearing and reading, he's going to be fully supported by the owners in January with a bumper transfer kitty. This is all quite something. And it's a very interesting period again in Aston Villa's history. On to Manchester United coming to Villa Park, a team we've had so much difficulty against at home. A lot of dodgy decisions. Bruno Fernandes is out with yellow card accumulation, so that's one less person who can earn some dodgy penalty decisions that are diabolical. But also injury issues for United as well. No Varane, no Lindelof, possibly no Antony as well. So this will be a rotated squad that's also chasing or has chased Real Sociedad in its Europa League tie. Now, they're coming off a satisfying, if unconvincing, 1-0 win over West Ham United, but I have to give Erik ten Hag a little bit of credit here because that's a difficult project to take on to begin with, the way that club is structured. And then, Ronaldo and his issues and ego. And remember, they lost at home to start the season to Brighton. Then they got pelted at Brentford away. And he faced the media and got absolutely murdered. I mean, it was hard to watch, taking punch after punch, uppercuts, shots and jabs, body blows, all of it. And he stood there and he took it and he answered all those questions. And they've kind of steadied the ship to their credit and now sitting in a decent position again in the Premier League. Older squad, some new faces. Is it there for the taking? I'm afraid to say it because Villa have been so poor against them at Villa Park. But they will face a fresh and hopefully rejuvenated Aston Villa, maybe benefiting once again from a new manager bounce. And you know that Unai Emery will be very prepared for this and will have a coherent plan against the Red Devils. And then lo and behold, the two teams will clash the following Thursday in the Carabao Cup. And what do you think the over-under is for dodgy, debatable decisions that go against Aston Villa? You know there will be VAR at Old Trafford for the Cup, even if there isn't at Stevenage in the same round. So I'm bracing myself for disappointment here, regardless of the new manager situation. I honestly just don't know what to think here. What is the formation going to be? How's the squad going to look? Will they be more robust than they were at Newcastle? Because Newcastle kind of bullied us a little bit physically, the way we kind of a little bit bullied Brentford. United haven't lost since the 6-3 at the Etihad against their crosstown rivals. This is one I just don't know what's going to happen at all. And that's kind of exciting in a way. So until the review of that show, stay dry, stay warm, and as always, up the mighty Villa.